Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, this one is a bit sensitive,
No.
but super important. We're going to be looking at the connection between trauma and kids who leave the Orthodox Jewish community.
Okay, so we're talking about off the direct kids then.
Exactly. OTD, yep. And our main source for this deep dive is this really insightful document by Avi Fishoff. He's been working with families, in crisis for over a decade.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, a long time. And you can actually reach out to him if you want. Like if you're
Wow.
looking for support through email or WhatsApp, we'll be sure to include that info in the show notes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Fishoff's perspective is that he doesn't really focus on those typical explanations, right? Like rebellion or sudden lack of faith.
I see.
He kind of goes deeper, into the impact of trauma.
Yeah, trauma is something that's often overlooked.
For sure. And I think what's so fascinating is how he directly challenges a lot of these common assumptions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like what kinds of assumptions?
Well, he argues that, we often completely misinterpret the reasons why a young person would decide to leave the Orthodox community.
Yeah, that makes.
So to illustrate this, he uses a really powerful analogy. It's the analogy of a child with a twisted ankle.
Oh, okay.
So picture this. You've got this kid, and they're struggling to get ready for school, right? And they're hopping around in pain because they have, a severely sprained ankle.
No, that sounds rough.
Yeah, and instead of offering help or understanding, the parent gets frustrated and starts yelling at the child, why are you so slow? You're going to be late. And they even threaten punishment. That's tough.
It's a pretty striking image, right? And I think it really brilliantly highlights this disconnect that can happen.
You mean between what's going on internally and what we see externally?
Exactly. Look, we can all understand that a physical injury, like a sprained ankle, it causes pain, right?
Yeah.
It limits your mobility.
Yeah.
But emotional pain, it's invisible.
It is, and that's what makes it so tricky. And because we can't see it, we might completely misinterpret a child's actions.
Yeah, we might think they're being defiant when actually they're hurting.
Right. Not realizing how deeply their emotional pain is actually affecting them.
It's so easy to forget that everyone's fighting a battle we can't see.
So true. This really resonates with me, It makes me think about all those times I might have judged someone's behavior without even knowing the full story.
I think we've all been there, haven't we?
Have you ever experienced something like that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a common human experience. We often only see the surface,
Yeah.
the outward actions, and we make assumptions based on that limited perspective.
Totally.
Like, you see a teenager being withdrawn or irritable, and you just label them as rebellious.
Yeah, you just jump to conclusions.
Without even considering what might be going on beneath the surface.
It's about digging deeper, right? So how does all of this tie back to Fishoff's argument about trauma being a driving force behind kids leaving the Orthodox community?
Well, Fishoff argues that for many of these kids, it's not simply a choice between one lifestyle and another.
Or it's not black and white.
Not black and white, no.
Mhm.
The trauma they've experienced, and this could be anything, like abuse, bullying, or even just the constant pressure to conform to really strict social and religious expectations. It's made them hypersensitive to stress.
They're carrying so much already.
Imagine living in this constant state of anxiety where even normal everyday interactions
Feel overwhelming.
Exactly. They feel overwhelming.
That makes sense if you're already carrying that burden of past trauma, even seemingly small things,
Absolutely.
could trigger a huge emotional response.
Yeah, things that others might not even bat an eye at.
Right.
And so they might react in ways that seem completely out of proportion to the situation,
Makes them seem difficult.
leading others to label them as difficult or rebellious.
But what if
Right? But what if?
we're misinterpreting that,
What if we viewed those reactions not as defiance,
but as expressions of pain?
but as expressions of deep-seated pain?
Yeah, that's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
And it makes me think about, how crucial it is to understand the types of trauma that might be particularly prevalent within the Orthodox Jewish community, right?
Yeah, because it's not just about individual experiences, but also about the potential impact of the community's structure and expectations.
It's the whole context.
Exactly.
I've heard from some former members of the community that the fear of social ostracism
Oh, yeah.
is very real and very powerful.
It's huge.
If you step outside the lines, you risk losing your entire support system, your friends, family, your whole community.
It's a huge price to pay.
Yeah, it really highlights the need to understand trauma not just as individual events, but as a potential consequence of the social and cultural context.
For sure. And Fishoff actually uses a heartbreaking story to illustrate this point, the story of Moish.
Oh, yeah, I was just about to ask about that. Tell me about Moish.
All right, so Moishe was a young boy who ultimately left the Orthodox community, and his parents, you see, they didn't know he had suffered abuse, so they perceived his actions as just simple misbehavior.
Oh, wow.
And they responded with harsh punishment.
It's like he was being punished for a reaction to trauma.
Exactly, adding another layer of pain on top of what he was already experiencing.
It's tragic. This brings up a crucial question, though. Like, if these kids are reacting to trauma,
Right.
why are they so often seen as simply rebellious? Or like they're just choosing a secular lifestyle? Why don't we see the underlying pain?
That's a great question, and it's a tough one to answer.
It is. It's the million-dollar question. I'm really curious to hear more about Fishoff's take on this.
Well, let's dive into that
Sounds good.
when we come back after the break. Welcome back. Before we go any further, I want to quickly recap, where we left off. We're talking about Avi Fishoff's perspective on the role of trauma in the lives of kids who leave the Orthodox Jewish community.
Right.
And his argument that trauma can make these children hypersensitive to stress and tension,
Yeah.
leading them to react in ways that might seem extreme or irrational to those who haven't experienced, similar trauma.
And one of the things that really stuck with me was Fishoff's point about the sweet and shy kids.
Oh, yeah.
He observed that a lot of times it's not the kids you'd think of as rebellious, who end up leaving the community.
It's not the stereotypical bad kids.
Exactly. It's often these quieter, more introverted kids.
That's interesting.
So why do you think that is?
Well, that's a great question. And it really challenges our assumptions, doesn't it?
It does.
You think it'd be the kids who are already pushing boundaries.
The ones who are already getting in trouble.
Yeah, the ones who are already getting in trouble, who would be the most likely to break away completely.
But that's not always the case.
But Fishoff suggests it's often the kids who internalize their pain, the ones who might not have the tools or the support to express their struggles outwardly.
So they hold it all in.
They hold it all in, and then eventually it just becomes too much.
And leaving, even though it means losing their family and community, it feels like the only option.
It feels like the only way to escape the pain.
That's a drastic step.
And Fishoff argues this just further underscores the role of trauma.
I see.
He believes that truly healthy, well-adjusted children just wouldn't have the emotional capacity to completely reject their family, their faith, their entire community.
It's like there has to be something really powerful pushing them away.
Right, something strong enough to overcome those natural bonds of family and tradition.
So are you saying it's not just about questioning beliefs or wanting more freedom?
It's not just about that, no.
Yeah.
It goes much deeper than that.
It goes deeper.
And this brings us back to the analogy of the child with the twisted ankle.
Okay.
Imagine that child, already in pain, being yelled at and punished for not moving fast enough.
Just adding insult to injury.
It not only adds to their physical pain, but it creates emotional pain as well.
They just feel so misunderstood.
They're hurting, and instead of receiving comfort and support, they're met with anger and judgment.
It's like a double whammy.
Exactly. They're not only dealing with the initial trauma, but they're also experiencing this sense of betrayal and isolation from the people they should be able to turn to for help.
That makes sense.
And those experiences, especially if they're repeated over time, can have a profound impact on a child's sense of self and their ability to trust others.
Yeah, it can really damage their self-esteem.
They might start to feel like they don't belong, like they're not safe or loved in their own home.
That's a horrible feeling.
And that feeling of alienation can be incredibly powerful, especially during adolescence, when kids are already going through so much change and uncertainty.
It's such a vulnerable time.
It is.
This makes me think about how important it is for parents, educators, and really anyone who interacts with young people to be aware of these dynamics.
Yeah, we need to be more mindful.
If we're not attuned to the potential impact of trauma, we might be inadvertently contributing to a child's pain.
Instead of helping them heal.
Yeah.
We often talk about the importance of creating safe spaces for young people.
Right.
But what does that really mean? I think Fishoff's work challenges us to think more deeply about what it takes to truly create environments where kids feel seen, heard, and supported, especially when they're struggling.
It's about going beyond just words.
It's about taking action.
So what are some concrete steps we can take? How can we move beyond just awareness and actually start to implement a more trauma-informed approach in our interactions with young people?
Well, for starters, I think it's about recognizing that behavior is often a form of communication.
What do you mean?
Kids, especially those who have experienced trauma, might not have the words to express what they're feeling.
So they act out instead.
Exactly. So they might act out, withdraw, or exhibit other behaviors that are really cries for help.
It's like they're trying to tell us something, but
They just don't know how.
they don't have the language for it.
They don't have the language or the emotional maturity to articulate it directly.
So it comes out in these indirect ways.
Yeah, ways that we might misinterpret as defiance or disobedience.
Right, right.
And if we can learn to see those behaviors not as problems to be punished, but as opportunities for connection and understanding,
That's a good point.
then we can start to shift the dynamic.
So instead of asking, what's wrong with this kid?
We should be asking, what happened to this kid?
And what does this child need from you right now?
Exactly. That's a much more helpful and compassionate approach.
It's about empathy.
It allows us to move beyond judgment and into a space of empathy and support.
This is such a rich and nuanced topic, and I really appreciate you walking us through it.
Of course.
It really highlights the complexity of the issue and the need for a more nuanced understanding of why some kids choose to leave the Orthodox Jewish community.
Absolutely. And while Fishoff's work focuses on this specific community,
Right.
I think his insights about the impact of trauma have much broader relevance.
Yeah, it makes me think about all the ways we as a society often fail to recognize and address the underlying trauma that might be driving certain behaviors, not just in kids, but in adults as well.
That's a really powerful observation, and it underscores the need for greater awareness and understanding of trauma and its effects on individuals, families, and communities.
Oh, we need to do better.
We need to create spaces where people feel safe to share their experiences, to seek help, and to heal.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, I know Fishoff also offers some specific guidance for parents and educators on how to create those safe spaces and support young people who might be struggling.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
I'm curious to hear more about what kind of practical advice he offers.
Let's dive into that. Welcome back to our deep dive into the connection between trauma and kids leaving the Orthodox Jewish community.
We've been talking a lot about Avi Fishoff's work
We have.
and how he kind of argues that trauma often plays like a significant role, in these situations.
Yeah, like he urges us to really look beyond just those surface behaviors.
Right, the stuff we can see.
And consider the deeper emotional pain that might be driving those choices.
Because there's always more to the story.
Exactly.
And one of the key things Fishoff emphasizes, and I think this is really important, is the need to shift our focus away from blame and judgment
Okay.
and towards understanding and empathy.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Instead of asking, like, what's wrong with this kid?
Which is so easy to do.
Right. It's like our default sometimes.
It is.
But instead, we should be asking, what happened to this kid?
That's a good point.
That simple change in perspective, it can have a profound impact on how we approach these situations,
That's like esoteric.
both as individuals and as a community.
For sure.
It's about recognizing that these kids aren't choosing to leave out of spite or rebellion,
It's not like a personal attack.
Exactly.
They're often reacting to this deep-seated pain and a sense of disconnect.
From the only world they've ever known.
Exactly.
And this requires us to be more attuned to the signs of trauma, right?
What kind of signs?
Fishoff points out that these kids often exhibit extreme sensitivity to stress, difficulty regulating their emotions, and a tendency to react in ways that seem disproportionate
Like overreacting.
to the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that.
They might also struggle with things like sleep, concentration, or forming healthy relationships.
It's like they're always on edge.
Right? Like constantly on high alert.
It's like they're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. And because they haven't developed those healthy coping mechanisms, even small things can trigger a huge emotional response.
It's like a ripple effect.
And this is where early intervention becomes crucial.
Yeah, get help early.
Because if we can identify these signs early on,
We can intervene.
we can provide the support and resources these kids need to develop resilience and heal from their trauma.
Okay, so what does that support actually look like in practice?
Good question.
Like, what concrete steps can parents, educators, community leaders take to create a more trauma-informed approach?
Well, it starts with creating environments that feel safe and predictable for these kids.
So, like, routine and structure.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Minimizing chaos and conflict, establishing those clear boundaries and expectations,
Yeah.
and responding to their emotional needs with compassion and understanding.
Makes sense, because if you're already dealing with the effects of trauma,
Yeah.
being in an unpredictable or chaotic environment, that can be so stressful and triggering.
It just adds to the burden.
Yeah.
It's about creating this sense of stability and security,
Like a safe haven.
a place where they feel safe enough to, let their guard down
Open up.
and start to process their experiences.
And it's also about validating their experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
Letting them know that their feelings are legitimate.
Even if their behavior isn't always acceptable.
Right, because it's two different things.
It's about helping them understand that their reactions,
Even if they seem extreme.
even if they seem extreme or irrational to others,
They make sense.
they make sense given what they've been through.
This requires a real shift in how we think about discipline.
It does.
It's not about punishment.
Right, moving away from those punitive approaches
We need to help these kids understand the root causes of their behavior.
and develop healthier ways of coping.
So what are some alternatives to punishment then? What are some more effective ways to address challenging behaviors in a trauma-informed way?
Well, one approach is to focus on teaching coping skills.
Like what kind of coping skills?
This could involve things like mindfulness exercises,
Okay.
relaxation techniques,
Breathing.
or strategies for managing anger and anxiety.
So it's about giving them tools.
It's about giving them the tools to regulate their emotions and respond to stress in healthier ways.
And sometimes that might involve seeking professional help, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like from therapists or counselors who specialize in trauma?
Trauma is complex,
It is.
and it often requires professional intervention
To really help individuals process their experiences.
and develop those coping skills.
There are therapists who specialize in working with children and adolescents who have experienced trauma.
And they can provide invaluable support and guidance.
It's also important to remember that trauma doesn't just affect the individual.
It affects the whole family.
It impacts the whole family system.
Parents might be struggling with their own unresolved trauma,
That's a good point.
or they might just be feeling overwhelmed and unsure of how to best support their child.
So it's about supporting the whole family.
Providing resources and support for parents can be just as important as working directly with the child.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's easy to focus on, the individual who's exhibiting the most obvious signs of distress.
Yeah.
But we need to remember that healing from trauma often involves the whole family.
It's a collective effort,
It is.
creating a more supportive and understanding environment for everyone involved.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I think Fishoff's work offers a really valuable framework,
I agree.
for understanding the complex challenges faced by kids who leave the Orthodox Jewish community.
It gives us a new lens to look through.
It does. And while his focus is on that specific community, his insights about the impact of trauma,
They're universal.
they have broader relevance for anyone who works with or cares for young people.
For sure.
Trauma is a universal human experience.
It is.
And understanding its impact can help us create more compassionate and supportive communities.
For everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. What if, instead of judging or dismissing these kids,
Right.
we approached them with curiosity and compassion?
That's a good one.
What if we saw their behavior not as a sign of defiance or rejection, but as a cry for help?
Powerful.
What if we as individuals and as a community made a commitment to creating spaces where healing and growth are possible?
I think that's the path towards a brighter future for all of us.
I agree. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.